A man declared himself a prophet. 70,000 souls believed his lies. Today, millions still fall into similar traps of deception. This isn't merely another false prophet's tale. This is a masterclass in how the darkest corners of human psychology can be weaponized to manipulate men. And the most terrifying part, this man achieved his deception while Prophet Muhammad was still walking among us. But before we unveil this shocking story, ask yourself, how is Ali could you be manipulated? How certain are you that your faith stands on solid ground? Because by the end of this account, you'll discover that even the most devout believers can fall prey to masterfully crafted lies. The man's real name was Musaylima He emerged from the powerful Bani Hanifa tribe in the Najd region of the Arabian Peninsula, physically imposing, charismatically gifted, and possessing an intellect sharp enough to cut through steel. These were his natural assets. But his true genius lay not in what Allah had granted him, but in how he chose to pervert these gifts for his own twisted ambitions. Timing, they say, is everything in deception. Musaylima understood this principle better than any manipulator in history. He didn't emerge during Prophet Muhammad's peak years, when Islam was spreading like wildfire across the Arabian Peninsula. No, this calculating deceiver waited. He watched. He studied. And when the moment was precisely right, when the Muslim community faced its most vulnerable hour following the Prophet's death, only then did Musaylima strike. The death of any great leader creates a vacuum. In that vacuum, chaos breeds. And chaos, as every master manipulator knows, is the perfect breeding ground for deception. The Muslim community, still reeling from the loss of their beloved Prophet suddenly found themselves questioning everything. Who would lead them now? How would they preserve the message? What would become of their young faith? Into this swirling maelstrom of uncertainty stepped Musaylima with his first devastatingly simple lie. I too receive revelation from Allah. But he didn't stop there. Oh no! This master deceiver understood that credibility comes from association with established authority, so he crafted an even more audacious claim. Muhammad and I had an agreement. He would be the prophet for Hijaz, and I would be the prophet for Najd. Not a shred of evidence existed for this outrageous claim. No witness could confirm it. No document proved it. Yet thousands upon thousands of people began to believe. Why? Because Musaylima had tapped into something far more powerful than evidence. He had tapped into human psychology itself. You see, what Musaylima understood, and what every successful manipulator throughout history has understood, is that people don't make decisions based on facts alone. They make decisions based on emotions, fears, desires, and psychological needs that often operate far below the level of conscious awareness. The people of Najd were afraid. The Prophet's death had left the entire Islamic world in a state of unprecedented uncertainty. Nobody knew what the future held. Trade routes that had been stabilized under Islamic rule now seemed uncertain. Political alliances that had been forged were suddenly in question. Families worried about their security, their livelihood, their very survival. But more than anything else, they feared being abandoned. The center of Islamic power was in Medina, hundreds of miles away. What if the new leadership forgot about them? What if resources and attention flowed only to the heartland of Islam while the peripheral regions were left to fend for themselves? Musaylima's message was psychologically brilliant in its simplicity. You don't need to worry about Medina anymore. Allah has sent me specifically to you. You are my people. You are chosen. You don't need to make long, dangerous journeys to distant lands. Your salvation is right here, with your own prophet, speaking your own dialect, understanding your own customs. This wasn't just a religious message. It was a psychological salve for every fear, every insecurity, every anxiety that plagued the people of Najd. Musaylima had positioned himself not just as a prophet, but as their prophet. Not just as a leader, but as their protector. Not just as a messenger of Allah, but as the answer to all their problems. But Musaylima's genius for manipulation was just getting started. His second weapon in the arsenal of deception was perhaps even more powerful than the first: the promise of ease. Islam, as revealed through Prophet Muhammad demanded 5 daily prayers. Musaylima declared, Allah has shown me mercy upon you. 2 prayers daily are sufficient. Islam prohibited alcohol consumption. Musaylima announced, "Moderate drinking is permissible for those who can control themselves." Islam forbade adultery and unlawful sexual relations. Musaylima claimed, in certain circumstances, Allah allows flexibility in these matters. Do you see the diabolical beauty of this strategy? Musaylima wasn't asking people to abandon their faith entirely. That would have been too dramatic, too obvious, too easy to reject. Instead, he was offering them a version of faith that aligned perfectly with their desires. Who wouldn't want an easier religion? Who wouldn't prefer fewer obligations and more freedoms? Who wouldn't be attracted to a spiritual path that demanded less sacrifice but promised equal reward? This is a pattern we see repeated throughout history, and it's happening right now in our modern world. False teachers who promise that faith should never be difficult. Spiritual leaders who insist that Allah's mercy means you never have to struggle with your lower desires. Religious innovators who claim that traditional interpretations are too harsh, too demanding, too outdated for contemporary life. Musaylima's third weapon was perhaps the most theatrical, fabricated miracles. Word began to spread throughout Najd about Musaylima's extraordinary powers. Witnesses claimed they had seen boiling water poured over his skin without causing burns. Others swore he had healed terminal illnesses with a touch. Still others insisted he could predict future events with uncanny accuracy. Of course, every single one of these miracles was carefully orchestrated deception. Some was stage magic, accomplished through prepared tricks and willing accomplices. Others were simply coincidences that were retroactively interpreted as supernatural intervention. Still others were complete fabrications, spread by devoted followers who believed that lying for their prophet was a form of worship. But the psychological impact was enormous. Human beings, especially in times of crisis, desperately want to believe in something greater than themselves. They crave signs, wonders, evidence that the divine is actively intervening in their lives. Musaylima understood this deep psychological need and exploited it ruthlessly. Modern psychology tells us about something called confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret information in ways that confirm our existing beliefs. Once people wanted to believe in Musaylima, they began seeing miracles everywhere. A lucky guess became prophecy. A coincidental healing became divine intervention. A successful outcome became proof of divine favor. Musaylima's fourth weapon was the systematic use of fear and intimidation, but he deployed it with the cunning of a master psychologist. He didn't begin with threats. No, he started with love, acceptance, and promises of divine favor. Only after people had invested emotionally in his movement did he gradually introduce the darker elements of control. "Those who reject me," he would declare in his gatherings, "reject Allah's mercy. They bring a curse, not only upon themselves, but upon their families for 7 generations. He would then recount fabricated stories of entire households that had supposedly suffered mysterious calamities after rejecting his message. This created what modern psychologists call social proof, combined with existential terror. People looked around and saw their neighbors, friends, and family members joining Musaylima's movement. They heard increasingly frequent stories of misfortune befalling those who resisted. The psychological pressure became overwhelming. Conform or risk everything you hold dear. But Musaylima's masterstroke was his fifth tactic, the creation of tribal supremacy wrapped in religious authority. "We, the people of Najd, are different?" he proclaimed with the confidence of a man who understood exactly which psychological buttons to press. "The Arabs of Medina are desert nomads, crude and uncivilized. But we are the sophisticated people of settled towns and fertile lands. Allah has sent me specifically to you because you are capable of understanding a more refined form of revelation." This message was psychological dynamite. It took existing tribal rivalries and transformed them into religious superiority. It made every follower feel simultaneously chosen by Allah and culturally superior to other Muslims. The psychological reward was intoxicating. Not only were they saved, they were elite. Musaylima even created a modified call to prayer that emphasized their special status. Come to the prayer of the chosen. Come to the blessing of the elevated. Come to the revelation of Najd. His sixth and most devastating tactic involved material promises, cleverly disguised as spiritual blessings. "Those who follow the true path I have revealed will prosper not only in the afterlife but in this world," Musaylima declared. Allah has shown me that our lands will yield greater harvests, our trade will flourish, our warriors will be invincible in battle. We will become the dominant force in all Arabia. These weren't just empty promises. Musaylima had a plan. He began organizing his followers economically and militarily. He established trade partnerships that initially brought genuine prosperity to some of his followers. He formed military alliances with discontented tribes who had grievances against the central authority in Medina. For a time, following Musaylima actually did bring material benefits to some people. This is the most dangerous aspect of sophisticated manipulation. It often delivers short-term rewards that seem to validate the manipulator's claims. People who experienced early benefits became living testimonials to Musaylima's divine favor. Their success stories spread throughout the region, attracting even more followers. But the most insidious aspect of Musaylima's deception was how he corrupted the very concept of revelation itself. He began producing what he claimed were divinely inspired verses, attempting to match the literary beauty and spiritual depth of the Quran. His followers would gather in circles as he recited these fabrications with the same reverence. Muslims showed two authentic revelations. One of his most famous fabricated revelations went, "O frog, daughter of two frogs, croak as much as you wish. Neither your upper part is in the water, nor your lower part. You do not muddy the water, nor do you drink it clear." To the modern ear, this sounds like absurd nonsense, because it is. But you must understand the psychological context. By the time Musaylima began introducing these fabrications, his followers had already invested so much of their identity, social standing, and material resources in believing him that rejecting his words would have meant acknowledging they had been fools. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy, the tendency to continue a course of action because of previously invested resources, even when continuing is clearly irrational. Musaylima's followers had burned bridges with other Muslim communities. They had reorganized their entire lives around his teachings. They had defended him against critics. To admit he was a fraud would have meant admitting their own gullibility, and most people will cling to almost any lie rather than face that kind of humiliation. As Musaylima's power grew, his true nature began to emerge. The man who had promised mercy and ease became increasingly tyrannical. He began executing critics within his own community. He ordered the assassination of poets who composed verses, mocking his claims. He demanded absolute obedience and punished even minor dissent with brutal violence. The kind, merciful prophet persona had been completely discarded, replaced by a paranoid dictator who saw enemies everywhere. But by this point, many of his followers were trapped. They had invested too much to back out, and the consequences of opposition had become too severe to risk. Meanwhile, in Medina, the first Caliph Abu Bakr was watching these developments with growing alarm. Reports were reaching him of a massive military force gathering in Najd under Musaylima's banner, 70,000 strong and growing daily. Abu Bakr faced an agonizing decision. These weren't just rebellious tribes. Many of Musaylima's followers were sincere Muslims who had been deceived. They included women, children, elderly people, and countless individuals who genuinely believed they were following Allah's guidance. But Abu Bakr also understood something crucial. If Musaylima's movement succeeded, it would fragment Islam permanently. Dozens of other ambitious men would see that claiming prophethood was a path to power and wealth. The religion revealed through Muhammad would be corrupted beyond recognition, split into countless competing sects, each claiming divine authority for their own innovations. The stakes couldn't have been higher. This wasn't just about stopping one false prophet. It was about preserving the integrity of the final divine message to humanity. Abu Bakr made the painful but necessary decision to deploy military force. He appointed Khalid ibn al-Walid, the brilliant military strategist known as Sayf Allah al-Maslal, the drawn sword of Allah, to lead the campaign against Musaylima's forces. The psychological transformation that occurred as the armies prepared for battle was remarkable. Musaylima, who had spent months building his image as a divinely protected prophet, began showing signs of deep anxiety. His speeches became more erratic, his promises more desperate, his threats more extreme. Today, he told his assembled army on the eve of the Battle of Yamama, "Allah will grant us the ultimate victory. Muhammad is dead. and now the revelation flows through me alone. Fight with absolute faith, knowing that paradise awaits the fallen and dominion awaits the victorious. But something had changed in Musaylima's voice, a tremor that hadn't been there before. For the first time, he was about to face a real test of his claims, and somewhere deep inside, he knew he was living a lie. Basit, birmetinde, hilbu, karma, ka, bir, y calle, son, be, 4,000 kelime olarak, jas, jorum. Khalid ibn al-Walid arrived at the Battle of Yamama. With more than just superior military strategy, he carried the weight of preserving Islam's authentic message for all future generations. This wasn't merely a conflict between armies. It was a decisive confrontation between truth and deception, between divine guidance and human manipulation. As dawn broke over the battlefield, the psychological contrast between the two leaders became starkly apparent. Khalid, known throughout Arabia as Saif Allah o Maslul, the drawn sword of Allah, exhibited the calm confidence of a man whose cause was just. His pre-battle speeches to the Muslim army were measured, focusing on their duty to protect the integrity of Allah's final revelation, rather than seeking personal glory or material gain. Musaylima, in stark contrast, appeared increasingly agitated as the decisive moment approached. His usual polished rhetoric gave way to desperate exhortations, filled with grandiose promises and increasingly desperate threats. Today, we will show these Medinan Arabs that Allah's true prophet stands with nigh, he declared, but those closest to him noticed the tremor in his voice, the sweat on his brow despite the cool morning air. The psychological transformation occurring within Musaylima's ranks was even more telling. For months, his followers had lived in an echo chamber of mutual reinforcement, surrounded only by others who shared their beliefs. But now, facing an army of battle-hardened Muslims who had fought alongside the Prophet Muhammad, saw himself, doubt began to creep into even the most devoted hearts. Some of Musaylima's followers began to whisper among themselves, "If he is truly a prophet, why does he look so afraid? Where are the angels he promised would fight beside us? Why hasn't Allah sent down the miraculous assistance he assured us would come?" These doubts spread through the ranks like wildfire, creating the kind of psychological instability that no military formation can withstand. Soldiers began glancing nervously at their neighbors, wondering if they were about to die for a lie. Khalid, with the keen eye of an experienced commander, immediately recognized the uncertainty in his enemy's ranks. Rather than launching an immediate full assault, he employed a brilliant psychological strategy. He ordered his forces to begin a slow, methodical advance while reciting verses from the Quran in unison. The effect was devastating to Musaylima's psychological warfare. Here were thousands of voices reciting the authentic words of Allah with absolute conviction, their faith unshakable, their purpose clear. In contrast, Musaylima's army heard only the nervous muttering of their own fabricated prayers and the increasingly frantic exhortations of their self-proclaimed prophet. As the armies clashed, Musaylima's carefully constructed persona began to crumble completely. The man who would spend months presenting himself as divinely protected, as the recipient of special revelation, as the chosen leader of a superior people, suddenly found himself in the chaos of actual combat where performance and pretense mean nothing. His first instinct wasn't to lead his troops courageously from the front, demonstrating the divine protection he had claimed. Instead, he began positioning himself strategically toward the rear of his forces, clearly prioritizing his own survival over the lives of the thousands who had believed his promises. But the most psychologically devastating moment came when Musaylima realized that his supernatural claims would be put to the ultimate test. In the heat of battle, with arrows flying and swords clashing all around him, there was no room for stage magic, no opportunity for carefully orchestrated miracles, no chance to retreat to a controlled environment where he could manufacture divine intervention. For the first time since he had begun his campaign of deception, Musaylima was forced to confront the complete absence of any genuine divine support. No angels appeared to fight beside him. No supernatural protection shielded him from enemy weapons. No prophetic insight revealed his enemy's strategies. He was simply a man, a frightened, desperate man whose lies had finally caught up with him. The psychological impact on his followers was immediate and catastrophic. Soldiers who had joined his cause believing they were fighting for Allah began to realize they had been deceived. Some threw down their weapons and fled. Others, too invested in the cause to abandon it, but no longer truly believing, fought with a desperate ferocity of men who knew they were doomed. Meanwhile, Khalid's forces pressed their advantage with the methodical precision of soldiers whose cause was just. They weren't fighting for personal gain or tribal superiority. They were fighting to preserve the purity of Allah's final message to humanity. The turning point came when one of Khalid's strategically positioned archers, a skilled warrior named Washi ibn Harb, managed to get within range of Musaylima himself, the false prophet, who had spent months claiming divine protection, suddenly found himself facing the sharp point of a spear with no supernatural intervention forthcoming. In that final moment, all pretense fell away. Musaylima, the man who had claimed to receive revelations from Allah, who had promised his followers that he was indestructible, who had convinced 70,000 people to stake their lives on his divine protection, died exactly like any other mortal man, afraid, alone, and completely powerless. The psychological impact of Musaylima's death on his surviving followers cannot be overstated. For months, they had organized their entire understanding of reality around his claims. They had restructured their relationships, their religious practices, their economic activities, and their political allegiances based on their belief in his prophethood. Now, watching their supposed prophet's lifeless body lying in the dust like any other casualty of war, they were forced to confront the devastating reality that they had been completely deceived. The man they had worshipped was just a man. The revelations they had memorized were just clever fabrications. The promises they had believed were just lies designed to manipulate them. Some of Musaylima's followers experienced what modern psychologists would recognize as complete psychological breakdown. They had invested so much of their identity in believing his claims that accepting the truth meant essentially admitting that their entire understanding of themselves and their purpose had been based on delusion. Others experienced a different kind of trauma, the crushing realization that they had not only been deceived themselves, but had participated in deceiving others. They thought of family members they had convinced to join the movement, friends they had recruited, children they had taught to recite Musaylima's fabricated revelations. The guilt was overwhelming. But many of Musaylima's followers, particularly those who had maintained some connection to authentic Islamic teaching, experienced something else entirely: relief. Deep down, they had known something was wrong. They had suppressed their doubts, ignored their inner warnings, and forced themselves to believe, because the alternative, admitting they had been fooled, had seemed too humiliating to bear. Now, with the truth undeniably revealed, they could finally acknowledge what they had known in their hearts all along. Many of these individuals immediately sought out the Muslim commanders to declare their repentance and request to return to authentic Islamic practice. The Battle of Yamama thus became not just a military victory, but a profound lesson in the psychology of deception and the ultimate triumph of truth over falsehood. It demonstrated that no matter how sophisticated the manipulation, no matter how appealing the lies, no matter how many people choose to believe deception, reality ultimately asserts itself. But the lessons of Musaylima's rise and fall extend far beyond the battlefields of 7th century Arabia. His techniques of psychological manipulation, appealing to people's fears, offering easy solutions to complex problems, claiming special divine favor, using group identity to create us versus them mentality, mixing truth with lies to make deception more believable. These same tactics are being used today by countless false teachers, cult leaders, political manipulators, and religious charlatans around the world. In our modern era of instant communication and social media, these manipulative techniques have become even more powerful and widespread. False teachers can reach millions of people simultaneously, creating echo chambers where their lies are constantly reinforced and dissenting voices are immediately silenced or Today's Musaylimas operate through television programs that promise health and wealth in exchange for donations. They run online courses that claim to reveal secret spiritual knowledge for a fee. They establish movements that offer simple solutions to complex societal problems while demanding absolute loyalty to their leadership. They use the same psychological tactics, promising ease instead of authentic spiritual growth. Claiming special revelation that contradicts established religious teaching, manufacturing fake miracles through stage magic, and selective reporting, creating in-group superiority complexes that make followers feel special and chosen. The defense against such deception remains the same as it was in the time of the first Caliph Abu Bakr: unwavering commitment to authentic religious authority, careful verification of claims against established scriptural teaching, healthy skepticism toward anyone who promises spiritual shortcuts or claims exclusive access to divine truth. Most importantly, the story of Musaylima reminds us that truth has a power that deception can never match. Lies may be temporarily compelling, especially when they tell people what they want to hear, but they cannot sustain themselves indefinitely. Reality has a way of asserting itself, and those who build their lives on authentic foundations will always outlast those who construct elaborate for contemporary Muslims. Musaylima's story serves as both warning and encouragement. It warns us to be vigilant against charismatic leaders who claim special revelation, promise easy paths to salvation, or demand unquestioning obedience. But it also encourages us that truth, no matter how severely tested, will ultimately triumph over falsehood. The authentic message of Islam, as preserved in the Quran and the authentic Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad has survived not only Musaylima's challenge, but hundreds of other similar attempts at corruption and distortion over the past 14 centuries. It will continue to survive because, unlike human fabrications, it carries the power of divine truth, the ring that represents authentic spiritual authority, the authority that comes from submission to Allah SWT rather than from manipulation of human psychology, can never be truly lost. It may be temporarily obscured by clever deceptions and appealing lies, but like Prophet Suleiman's ring in the earlier story, it will always resurface, carrying with it the full power of divine truth. Today, as we face our own array of false prophets, manipulative leaders, and spiritual charlatans, we can take comfort in knowing that the same divine protection that exposed lies 14 centuries ago continues to operate in our world. Truth may be temporarily suppressed, but it cannot be permanently destroyed. The question for each of us individually is the same question that faced the people of Najd in Musaylima's time. Will we have the wisdom to recognize authentic spiritual authority when we see it? Will we have the courage to reject appealing lies in favor of challenging truths? Will we invest our faith in leaders who demand nothing but obedience, or in principles that demand everything but submission to Allah alone? The story of Musaylima reminds us that these choices have consequences not just for ourselves, but for our families, our communities, and future generations. Those who chose truth over comfort, authentic guidance over appealing deception, preserved not only their own spiritual integrity, but contributed to protecting the authentic message of Islam for all who would come after them. In the end, Musaylima's legacy serves as a permanent reminder that human beings, no matter how clever, charismatic, or temporarily successful, cannot improve upon divine revelation. Every attempt to add to, subtract from, or modify Allah's guidance ultimately fails, often with devastating consequences for those who allow themselves to be deceived. The true spiritual ring, the authority that comes from authentic submission to Allah SWT, remains available to every sincere believer who approaches it with humility, seeks guidance through authentic sources, and remains vigilant against the eternally tempting promises of false prophets and spiritual manipulators. May we all have the wisdom to recognize this authentic authority, the courage to embrace it fully, and the commitment to preserve it for those who will follow us. Ameen.